Hey guys, so my name is Johnny and I'm here with a GH4 tutorial, just kind of like an introduction on getting the GH4 up and running. When you are going to the media center, you're going to find the GH4 will come with two batteries, the battery charger, and you'll get two SD cards. SD card USB adapter so you can plug it into your computer. You'll have some ND filters here. So this one has 4 ND filters here, 4 different kinds. And of course, you'll get the camera body with the kit lens, and all of this comes in a very nice backpack system here. I'm going to go through all of the basic kind of things with these cameras, and I'm going to explain a little bit about all of those little things I'm going to talk about. Like one of the first things that you want to do when you pick up these cameras is to make sure that your batteries are charged. When you get home or wherever you're going to be, make sure that you plug in these batteries and plug it into the wall and just let them charge. So there's a little LED here. When they are charged, like you'll see it's going to turn green, right? So I'm going to put the battery in here, like so. Close that guy. These SD cards are great. I suggest buying your own SD cards because these eventually these SD cards will fail. So I'm going to put this SD card in here, right? And then here is how you're going to turn it on. So when you're going into movie mode, you want to make sure that this dial is set to movie. So select it right here. So you'll have to see the little icon, and then you press this little button here, and that'll lock it in place so you won't accidentally move it. And then this switch down here, this is how you're going to turn it on. So you just flick it up, the green LED comes on, and you're ready to go. I'm going to walk you guys down the menu system here. This is the menu button. So we're going to go into that. We're at this top tab here for our motion picture. So here we have photo styles. So you can see as I'm scrolling through, the colors change a little bit. Standard, I would suggest standard if you're just doing a video just for the sake of doing a video. You don't want to color grade, you just want it as is. But if you do want to color grade, like change the saturation, change the highlights, those kinds of things. With the Panasonic, you do have the Cine-like D and Cine-like V. So those are kind of Panasonic's log profiles for these cameras here. You can see with the D, the Cine-like D, the image is a little bit desaturated there. The contrast, it's very low contrast, so it's a very neutral image. That way in post, you can kind of bring up the saturation, the contrast, etc., etc. For this project, I'm gonna make these settings for like a cinematic interview, and I want to color grade it, so I'm gonna choose the Cine-like D. So now you have recording format. So this is where you actually choose the file type of the video files. So you can see here, there's 4 different options here. So depending on what you want to do, you'll probably want to select one or the other. So if you look here, you'll see all the different little descriptions here, right? So let's say you were gonna just do like a regular video, you don't want to color grade and you don't have a lot of space on your computer. Maybe your computer is not that good for editing, but you just want to make a video quick and easy, I would suggest doing the MP4. But if you're looking to color grade and you want like all the data so you can have more control in post, I would suggest MOV. So the two differences between MP4 and MOV is MP4 files are very good for streaming, like YouTube videos, anything you put on the internet. The file sizes are going to be small, somewhat compressed. But with MOV, the file sizes are going to be bigger. You're going to be writing more data, so there's going to be more information for you to have more control in post. So those are some of the differences. And since I want to set this for a kind of like a cinematic interview, I'm going to choose MOV. Okay. So now we have recording quality. The GH4 can record 4K, HD, and so on. You can see here all the information, like the resolution. So 4K, this is going to be 3840 by 2160, and it'll tell you how much data it's going to write, so 100 megabits per second. So I'm going to choose something that's 24p, but I want to shoot in 4K. So let's see, we got this guy here. Okay, here we go. So we got 4K at 23.98p, so basically 24, and it's gonna write at 100 megabits per second. Now we got exposure modes. You want to give yourself more control than the camera. You don't want to give the camera the ability to just change things on the fly automatically. So for the exposure mode, I'm going to choose M for manual. And that way I can set the ISO, I can set the aperture, the shutter speed manually, and it won't change. And if you choose any of the other modes, it will basically give the camera the ability to change either one of those things. So I'm going to choose manual so I can have more control. And then let's talk about some of the other features of this camera, the other modes that you'll probably want to look at while you're setting up your camera. So I'm just going to try to keep this a little bit more intro basic just to get you started. We'll do digital zoom off, time code is off, sound output is real time, silent operation, so if you want it to be, quiet while you're operating the camera so you're not disturbing people, I'll keep that on. So here we have your mic level adjustment. Let's say I'm the talent, so you're going to have your talent talking and you want to adjust the levels. So you can see here on the levels, it's going in the red, so that means the sound is clipping there. So that's not really good. So I'm just going to keep talking and then adjust here using these dials. Okay, I think like around here is good. So it looks like we're not peaking at all. It's not going in the red. So I'm going to select that. Now we have our mic level limiter. I'm going to keep that off. Our wind cut, I'm going to keep that off because we're going to be inside. And that's about that for the first tab here. So now we're going to go into our custom and we're going to see if there's anything there. So silent mode, shutter autofocus, and peaking. I'm going to keep the peaking off. I'm going to keep the histogram on. So the histogram, you can choose to put it wherever you want. I'm going to keep it over here. And that's going to be useful for me. So with the histogram, you're going to be able to see what the light levels are in frame to help you properly expose your image. And the grid line, yeah, I want to do cinematic stuff. So yeah, maybe my rules of thirds would be great. So I'm going to keep that on. My center marker, I'll turn that off. And all these other stuff, let's see. We've got zebra patterns and that. Okay, so that's that. We'll go into the next mode here. So here's where you can set, your time and date for your camera. That way, if you're working with a lot of footage, you can kind of match it by day. Here we have our speaker volume. So this is going to be the speaker of the actual camera itself when you're doing playback. I'm just going to put it to 0. This is where you're going to adjust your headphone volume. So if you want to monitor, wearing headphones, you can adjust your levels here. Okay, so system frequency, you want to make sure this is set to this right here, NTSC, so 59.94 hertz. And that's important because we live in North America, so that's just kind of like the frequency that we're using here, so make sure that that is set to that. And here's we have sensor cleaning if you want to have the camera clean the sensor. And then here is we have format. So we'll go to format here. And before you format your card, you want to make sure that there's nothing on your card that you haven't backed up. So maybe we'll just say no here and we'll just check our card real quick. So to do that, there's a button here in the corner, this green button here for playback. So if you press that, oops, let me get out of the menu. You press that, you see we have actual footage here. So I didn't take this footage, but I don't think it's important for me to have it, so I'm just going to delete this. So I'm going to go back to the menu here. So I'm going to format it. Okay, so let's go back to the menu. All right, other than that, that's it. And then here you just have menus for the playback. So now that we have all of the settings and menus stuff figured out, we're gonna go into the buttons and basically getting yourself ready to start recording. So here we can see in this mode here is our recording mode. So we're recording movie, manual exposure. We see that we're in Cine D, Cine like D, that's our picture profile there. We see we're recording in MOV in 4K 24p, manual focus. Our histogram is over here. Here we have our levels here for monitoring our audio. Our aperture is 2.8, and this is our shutter speed. And here we have our ISO, and then here in the corner is how much space we have on our SD card, so about an hour and a half about. So now let's set this up for our cinematic interview. So for our cinematic interview, I want to choose a shallow depth of field. So I want to adjust this aperture here to, yeah, maybe 2.8 or even something, something more shallow than that. So to adjust your aperture here is this little dial right here. You can adjust your aperture. That's one way of doing that. You can also press this quick menu button here and then use the dial and go to there, and you can adjust that way too, like that. So we see here it can only go as low as 2.8. It can only open up as much as 2.8. So what our aperture does is it opens and closes the iris in the lens here. So when you open it up to 2.8, you're going to have a shallow depth of field, right? Maybe like this is as much of the stuff, the things between my hands is what's going to be in focus, right? Not a lot. But also 2.8, a lot of light's going to go in there. But when you close down the iris to maybe 20 or something like that, or 10, so what you're going to do is increase the depth of field, so more things can be in focus, right? More things can be in focus, but you're letting less light in. So those are the two basic things that you just need to know about the aperture, is that it controls how much light goes in, but also it controls your depth of field. So at 2.8, you'll have maybe, a really shallow depth of field, like this, which is great for like, photography, like, because you're only focusing on something, or in cinema, you're only focusing on something and you're letting light in, a lot of light in. But when you close it down to 20 and up, or like the more you increase, it's just going to increase your depth of field, but also it's going to let less light in. So now we'll go into shutter speed. To capture kind of natural motion blur, our eyes see about like that. So 24p, and you want to double that for your shutter speed. So double 24 is a 48, but we don't have 48 here, we have 50. So this dial here controls your shutter speed. So we're going to set it to 50. And also the shutter speed, it also controls how much light goes into your camera. But also it controls, how much motion blur is in your camera. So think of like photography. If you really want to capture that sports player running down the field, you want to increase your shutter speed to something higher so you can capture that moment and not have any motion blur. But that also decreases how much light it can go into your camera. But for video, you want to keep it to double what your settings are. So I'm going to keep it to 50. All right, so now we're going to talk about the ISO on the camera. So our ISO is down here. And what the ISO does is it controls how sensitive our sensor is to light. To change that, there's a button here that says ISO. So you can press that to change your ISO. You can use this dial here and change that from 200 to whatever you need based on your settings here. You can also use the quick menu here as well and just move to that. So with our ISO, the higher you go with the ISO, the more sensitive it is going to be to light, the more light it's going to be able to capture. If we change that to, let's say 800 to 1600 or 3200, we can see what our levels look like. So that's what our levels look like for 3200. And this is what our levels look like at 400. So the higher the ISO, the more light you're going to have in the image, but it's also going to introduce noise and grain and all sorts of artifacts in there. So with these cameras, I tried to keep the ISO at 800. That's as high as I'll go. but the lower the better, because then that way I kind of like preserve the quality of the image. With our histogram, it shows us how much light is in our image here. So basically it helps us expose our image. The more on the left, the more values we have in our blacks and our shadows. The more on the right we have in our whites and our highlights. So we can see that by, once I put my hand in the image here, you can see how the levels change. So the light that's reflecting, this is a lot of white here, but when I take my hand out, there's a lot of blacks there. So that helps us with exposure. So I'm going to use my hand here and see if I could make the histogram change color to white. The color of the histogram changed from yellow to white, and that's basically the sensor telling us that it thinks this is proper exposure for our image. But that's just a guideline. If you want like the best exposure, you want to try to have your values more into center here, because then in post you can, obviously you can change the exposure or do a little color grading and those kinds of things. So one of the other buttons that you should know about is this guy here. So this little dial here controls your autofocus. So sometimes you might be like, even though you've gone in the menus and you've turned the continuous autofocus is off, but your camera is still doing autofocus stuff. So you want to make sure that this dial here is set to MF. So here we have 3 different modes here. AFS, autofocus single. So that's as if you were to autofocus on something and the camera will pretty much lock that focus point and it won't change. So here you have AFC, so autofocus continuous. So here's where your autofocus will like change with your subject, if your subject is moving around, whatever your subject would be. And here we have MF for manual focus. So if you want to use this, I highly recommend keeping it on manual focus, especially if your subject is not moving. That way you guarantee the camera won't try to autofocus on their eye or their hands or some other things that's moving in frame. So other than that, there's one button that's also pretty important, especially for your image, and that is your white balance. So with the white balance, you want to make sure that your colors are very accurate. That way your subjects, their skin tones are accurate, the whole image is accurate, and that will save you a lot of time in post with color correction and color grading and those kinds of things. So there's a button here for white balance. So you press that, WB. And here, just like I said before, you don't want to give your camera the ability to just change things on the fly. Here, we have it on auto white balance. And if you use this dial, we have a couple of different modes here. So just look at the image. You can see that the colors will change as I change this, right? Here we have daylight. This is for cloudy. This is for shade. And this is like tungsten lighting. So in video, there's really only 2 color temperatures that you really need to know. So here we have this K for Kelvin with this little wrench tool. So if you go all the way to there, using these dials, you can see that we can change the color temperature. So the 2 color temperatures that you really need to know is daylight, which is about 5600 Kelvin, right? And then for tungsten, 3200 Kelvin. So those are the only 2 colors really that you just need to know when it comes to video. And in this studio space, our lighting here is 3200 Kelvin. And now that this camera is set to 3200 Kelvin, you can see what the background looks like on this monitor here. So that's what the color looks like. It should be pretty accurate. Also with this camera here, we're recording in 3200 Kelvin. So now we'll do the same test using the camera that we're recording on. Let's go with this guy. So this is 3200 Kelvin. And this is what my skin tone looks like. That flag in the background, that is actually blue, so that's what that looks like. So now we'll change to 5600 for daytime lighting. So now my skin tone is very warm. The flag is blue, but you can see how the colors have changed. So we'll set this back to 3200. And now we're back at 3200 and everything looks great. Just knowing those 2 color temperatures will really save you when you're out there filming. So if you're outside, most likely it's going to be 55, 5600. And if you're indoors, if you just kind of look around and see that your light fixtures and everything is warm, set it to 3200 Kelvin. But once you do those two, when you go into post, it'll be easier for you to edit because you'll know you only use one or the other. Now you're ready to record. So if you want to record, it's just this button right here, our record button. So when you press that, you're going to see it's going to record, and you're going to see a little countdown there, how much time you're recording. And this is going to reflect here how much time is left on our SD card. And when you want to stop recording, it's easy as just pressing that button again. So now we're going to look at all of the different kinds of like connectors on the camera. So here is where we can insert our microphones. If you have an external microphone, it's a 3.5 millimeter jack there. And if you want to monitor your sound, we have our headphones here. So same thing, 3.5 millimeter. And here's we have our HDMI and everything like that. If you plan on maybe you want to connect it to a TV to monitor your video, or maybe you want to do a self-record, but the LCD screen is too small, so you can hook it up to a monitor. So here is we have our kit lens here. So of course, you know, like photography, you have your zoom here and you have your focus here. And on our lens here, we can see, I don't know if you can see, it says this is a 12 to 40 millimeter, 2.8. So that means, you know, that's the focal length of this camera, and 2.8 is as open as it'll go, which is great. And that's pretty much about it. That's everything that I have here for this intro to getting the GH4 started. So we've gone through all of our settings here, recording formats, file types, how much data is written, and we've talked about how to, you know, monitor our sound. We talked about getting our settings and everything ready for video. So if there's anything else that you guys need help with or have questions about, or even if you want to talk about your projects, feel free to come to Shulman Hall, room 225. That's where our office is, and let's chat.